report from the Government Accountability Office says that the U.S. Postal Service operates on a business model that is, quote, not viable, and that the agency needs to make more job and wage cuts and even consider outsourcing some operations. Well, in March, the Postal Service announced its own plan to cut Saturday delivery beginning in the first half of next year. Joining me now is Ruth Goldway. She's the chairman of the U.S. Postal Regulatory Commission. Ms. Goldway, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today. So the U.S. Post Office has come out with its own 10-year plan put out in light of the declining demand for the services of the U.S. Postal Service. How do you think it compares with this proposal, or this audit, really, that was just put out by the GAO?
Well, the GAO has been saying the same thing for the last 15 years, whether the Postal Service does well or does poorly from year to year. So I'm unfortunately disappointed that they have nothing new to say. The Postal Service's report, which they produced on March 10th, is quite similar, but I think at least it was a more of an honest attempt to give the numbers and the analysis for why they believe that the Postal Service is in trouble. I, on the other hand, am somewhat skeptical of both of their reports. I think that the Postal Service is still viable, still an essential part of the communications network in America, and that we can find a way to make it work somewhat differently, but it can work for now and into the future.
One of the most perhaps controversial ideas is this idea to stop mail service on Saturdays. Congress would have to remove restrictions on that. Do you think that would be a good idea?
Well, in addition to the Congress having to remove restrictions, the Postal Service has to come to us, the regulator, to ask our opinion on whether we think changing from 6 to 5 days is a good idea. So I can't give an absolute on this, but I will assure you that the decision is not final by any means, and that the Postal Regulatory Commission is going to give a very thorough review to the issue. We'll hear everybody's concerns and complaints, and we'll decide whether we think the savings are as great as the Postal Service thinks, whether the harm to the postal customer and to the volume of the mail is as little as the Postal Service thinks, and we'll make a recommendation as to whether we think the Postal Service should cut service.
Let me ask you, what do you think? You've been a regulator here for so many years. I apologize for interrupting.
No, that's okay.
What do you think? I mean, do you think 5 days of snail mail service is enough? Is enough to suffice?
I can make an argument either way. I would say that I'm more of a traditionalist and skeptical, but I'm going to hear all sides of the cases. I believe that the Postal Service has not taken into account the needs of those people who are not connected to the internet, the needs of senior citizens, the elderly, the people in rural areas who depend upon the mail and who don't have access to other opportunities. And the Postal Service is obliged under the Constitution to provide universal service everywhere, so that even if we have some problems with funding, that service is part of what we've come to consider part of the United States government, and we'll have to think of ways in which we can provide some level of service that everyone thinks is adequate.
So the U.S. Post Office, as you know, is the second largest civilian employer in this country. Right. How many jobs are at risk with these discussions of cutbacks?
Well, with the discussions with regard to 6 to 5 day, it's anywhere between 15,000 and 40,000, and I've heard numbers on both sides. And then the Postal Service is proposing cuts in other parts of its system as well. It's already reduced the employment from 850,000 at its max at the end of the last century to 600,000 now. More than a quarter of its workforce has gone already.
What other cuts besides those jobs?
Well, there will be cuts in processing, and the Postal Service is also hoping to cut jobs at post offices, which would be another impact on customers and the rural areas.
Now, Chairman Goldway, you are the longest serving, I read this on your Wikipedia page, Senate-conferred presidential appointee in a full-time position in the executive branch of the U.S. government. Have you ever been privy to challenges in times as challenging as they are today?
Well, I don't think anything's been this challenging, but I have recalled twice in my 11 years that the Postal Service has faced enormous deficits in the multi-billion dollars, and the next year turned around and made a profit. And I believe that with the economy turning around now, the balance sheet for the Postal Service will be better than its predictions. However, in this case, As a result of legislation passed 3 years ago, the Postal Service is saddled with an enormous burden separate from its operations to fund its health care retiree benefit funds, to prepay those funds, and to pay 100% of those over a short period of just 10 years. That's a financial burden of about $5.5 billion a year. That is really the problem the Postal Service is suffering from now.
Indeed. Well, Ruth Goldway is the chairman of the Postal Regulatory Commission. We thank you for your time.